Welcome to the Film for Fans podcast, your home for movie news, reviews, and movie fan views. This is the podcast from movie fans for movie fans. I am your host, Ryan Dunlevy, and I'm joined by my co-host, Rob Dunham.
This is absolutely the start of the podcast.
Absolutely. And we will be joined later by a special guest. Lauren Cline will be joining us. And we have a great show, and which Lauren will be helping us talk about book to movie adaptations. We're also going to review the box office, both the past week performance and what's coming up this week. And we'll conclude with our watch list. All right, Rob, you ready?
I'm ready to talk only about comic books for the entire book to movie adaptation segment.
Indeed. All right. So let's get started with a little box office news. Last week in the box office, first week in the box office for several movies, actually. And the champion of the box office is Jungle Cruise. Yes, Jungle Cruise makes its debut at number one, turning in $34.1 million. It was debuted in 4,300 locations. It also did $27.6 million internationally and about $30 million on Disney Plus preferred access streaming. So Jungle Cruise taking the cake. I'm not surprised it was number one. I actually got to see this weekend, and the theater was packed. So it was good to see a packed theater and lots of different audiences. There's a group of I want to say late 50s, early 60s group, all having an outing together. There was parents with kids. There was myself and another couple who were there. It was a very diverse crowd in terms of age ranges. So obviously a lot of people felt appeal for this movie. So all told, it made a little over $90 million for the weekend. The second place coming in was The Green Knight, who also debuted this past week, and it found its way to second with $6.78 million. Old came in third at 6.75. Black Widow was fourth at 6.4 million. So, Rob, what did you make of Jungle Cruise taking the box office?
I am completely unsurprised that Jungle Cruise sailed at a smooth and steady pace to the top spot. Maybe there's another word for that.
Oh gosh.
But there's no surprise anymore when it comes to Dwayne Johnson.
Yeah,
I'm going to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Dwayne Johnson's in your movie, you're going to make money. I think the most surprising thing about that 90 million number is that a third of it was streaming from Disney, all access, premium access. $30 million of that amount was from there.
Yeah,
which is it's very interesting. It makes me wonder and hope for their lives of the Disney executives who bankrolled this movie and others in the future, like actually redid the contracts with the people who are in them. Because not only did Scarlett Johansson sue them, Emma Stone also did. Because of the same kind of issues when it came to Cruella. So hopefully they figured that out and are rapidly rewriting every contract that they wrote with these people, because it's just going to keep happening if they don't address these issues. And they definitely do not want that to be a big story. I know that's for sure.
Yeah. And most likely anything that gets caught that cost them for losing a suit would have easily been taken care of at a lesser expense had they just redone some contracts. I'm sure that's the case. Yeah, but it is interesting because we've now had two relatively big movies where the streaming was close to the box office numbers. So there's two ways to look at that. One is the box office is actually really still able to keep up and go somewhat above the streaming numbers, despite still being lots of coronavirus scare. The other way to look at it is how much are they costing themselves in tickets by having that easy access streaming immediately.
Because if you sell 1 million copies of the video at $30 a piece, you get to 30 million. But how many people are watching each of those 1 million?
Yeah.
Then that's where the $30 price tag doesn't seem quite sufficient when you consider that 6 people might be watching it all at the same time. But I think that probably that $30 is about the max you could charge in that model. I don't think people would pay more than that.
No, I agree.
But people justify it because they say it's cheaper than buying 3 movie tickets. Family's going to watch it. But that's where they're going to lose money that way. So the question, as we have stated repeatedly, is how are they going to balance those?
Yeah, for sure. But the number, to put it into context, everyone was pleased with the number that the Jungle Cruise did. They were pleased with where it came out. They thought it did a little bit better than they were anticipating. So that continues to bode well for the state of movies. And I think that that's continuing to improve. And I think the industry is at very least beginning to stabilize a little bit. And I think that was shown by the fact that there were several movies who debuted over the last couple of weeks that I haven't gotten to see. There are actual movies out there that I've wanted to see and have not had time to go see all of them. It's been a long time since I could say that was the case.
Yeah.
And that's great. I love that that's the case. If I want to go to a movie tonight, I can go to a movie tonight and there'd be multiple options of what I want to see. That's more back to where I'm expecting, back more towards normal. So movies that are still out in theaters: Green Knight, Stillwater, Old, Snake Eyes. And if you still haven't caught Fast and Furious or Black Widow, they're still out there as well, depending on which theater you get to. So you got plenty of options. And we're going to add a new one this week. Yes, the big release coming out this week is The Suicide Squad. And we have mentioned The Suicide Squad a number of times, but finally it's out. It's going to make its debut. So I thought one way to tackle this for us, since this is really the only major release this week, is what would have to happen for you in order for this movie to be good, for you to enjoy it, for you to say, hey, I went and saw The Suicide Squad and it was good. What do you think would have to happen?
The dialogue and interplay between the characters has to feel natural. Not forced, not stilted, not lame.
Yeah.
Which I think the first attempt at this struggled with. And I feel like there's potential for it to be better with James Gunn. So we'll see.
Yeah, for me, I think the balance of action and humor. This is one thing that James Gunn did fantastically well with Guardians of the Galaxy. That injection of humor. What made that movie was the use of humor in smart, fun, entertaining ways, balanced out by the action. I know they're going to try to do the same thing with Suicide Squad, but we also know it's going to be significantly more violent. Now, the question is, can they balance that humor and violence well? I think about the scene from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the flamethrower scene. And it was so unbelievably, that house break-in scene, that whole scene is unbelievably violent, and I could not stop laughing. Just how they set it up and how it went. It was the perfect balance of extreme violence and humor. And if Suicide Squad can pull off anything somewhat close to that, I think it can be successful.
Yeah, that's definitely a major part to watch out for.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, I don't say that I have a ton of confidence in it, but it's one of those things too, where if another director fails with the Suicide Squad, and that's multiple failures, we might be approaching Fantastic Four territory, in which it becomes a property that nobody wants to touch anymore because nobody can make it work. And maybe that's the case. We'll see. Okay. And now on to our discussion segment for tonight. And to help us with our discussion, we're bringing in a special guest, Lauren Cline. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
Lauren is a vociferous reader of fiction and biographies. And so she will be here because our discussion topic for today is book to movie adaptations. Yes, we're going to talk to book to movie adaptations, perhaps the best source of movies there is, originate from books, but some of them are really good, some of them are not so good, and we're going to talk about why. And then we're going to give some of our favorite adaptations. So let's start with this. Lots and lots of movies are adapted from books, and sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. So let's start with this question. What makes it hard to adapt a book to a movie? What makes it hard? So let's start with our special guest. Lauren, what are your thoughts?
I think it's really hard because, especially for me, people love books.
Yes.
And they have this real emotional response to them, and they just love the characters and the settings that they're forming in their heads. And so they're visualizing all these things. So when a movie doesn't deliver those things that you had in your head, sometimes it can just be really disappointing. So it's definitely challenging to like nail the characters and the dialogues and just all those like big pivotal scenes from a book. And then just bringing that to life, I think, can be really hard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Rob, what do you think?
I think people think when it comes to writing a screenplay, dialogue is a simple thing to do. But when you're adapting a book, it's not as simple. Lauren touched on this already, but a writer will often give context clues about how the person speaking is feeling, or maybe a dialogue that's going on inside their own head before they speak. And those kind of things are very difficult to portray on a screen, because you can have a whole paragraph about what the person was thinking, and then you have the actual speaking.
Yeah.
And the actor has to convey like all of that along with the lines. It's not an easy thing to do. And I'm actually reading the newest Stephen King novel. And when I read him, I think about that, because he gives so much exposition about he was thinking this and he was really thinking this, or a description of the speaker's state of mind before he even utters a word. And those things are just incredibly difficult to portray. And that's why people who win Oscars, because they can portray emotion and background thoughts and how they say a line.
Yeah. It puts a lot more weight on the setting, on the actor, on the surrounding characters, on everything else, because what a writer has the opportunity to tell you in a few paragraphs, a screenplay or a movie has to tell you in a line, with a look and a mood, with a soundtrack to the back, and all of that has to align. So in some ways, writing is easier. I think the other aspect of that is there is a much bigger time constraint with movies. You know, for the most part, you have between an hour and a half and 2.5 hours on the max end to tell your story. Whereas an author can tell it in however many pages they want. Usually there's some kind of limit on that, unless you're Stephen King. Or if you've read 1120, what is it, 1120?
63, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is a super long book. It's a super long book. It's like 600 pages.
Yeah.
But most books, 200-300 pages. So they have as much time as they want to lay out the story, to tell you exactly what they're doing, to give you all the background information. And you just simply do not have that kind of time when it comes to a movie.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. And those are just some of the challenges. Plus, when an author's working, he's dealing with basically his own thoughts in his own heads, and then an editor. So then you get editors come in, and the editing process, and there's feedback between that. There's a lot more people involved when you're talking about a movie, more than just the screenwriters. There's a lot more people involved.
And I think you can always tell when the author has worked with the screenwriters. I
Yeah.
think that they oftentimes turn out better when you have the author's input.
This is true. This is true. And I think some of this will hit when we go to a further question, but having to, a lot of times the screenwriter is different than the author of the book. Occasionally the author will do the screenplay, but usually, even if they're working with them, it'll be somebody else doing the screenwriting.
Yeah.
And to have them have the same vision is difficult. To have them being on the same page and the same vision when something is coming out of someone else's imagination is hard.
Yeah.
So if that's the challenges, what makes them good? When it's done well, what makes book adaptations good? Rob, let's start with you on this one.
I think the biggest advantage that the visual medium has is that it's visual. I mean, I know that sounds super simple, but you can take what is written about a setting and bring it to life. And I think that can be a challenge sometimes because people have a certain idea in their heads about what they want it to look like. But when you do it well, and when I think about this, I think about, we talked about this recently, the settings in Lord of the Rings movies that they shot all the locations for and did all the scouting for. When you set those locations right and really bring the story to life, it can be something that enhances the experience of reading the book, which is not always the case, but it's definitely possible. And I think just having the ability to give life and breath to a lot of the words that are written down, to make them jump off the page and belong not just in imagination, but in front of you, is something that when an adaptation is done well, you see very clearly.
Yeah, no, that's good. What do you got, Lauren?
I think for me, the two big things are casting, having the actors and actresses look, or maybe not even look, but just emulate the characters really well, and sticking to the original plot. I hate when there's some sort of like plot twist or different ending. Like it has to be what it was in the book.
Does that include even if you don't love the ending to the book?
Yes, actually, that is a point I would bring up under my favorites.
Okay.
There was a really good one that I didn't like the ending of the book, but I really wanted the movie to have that same ending.
Oh, that's interesting. Because I might bring up, because you're doing that, I might bring up one where I have a counter to that one. That should be fun. Okay. Yeah, no, that's good. It has to have the same ending. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. I think for me, a couple of things that when it's done well, what they do is they're able to take the heart and the soul of the characters themselves and allow those things to stand out. I think that's one of the keys, because you're going to have to cut scenes, or you're going to have to cut dialogue, or you're going to have to cut somewhere because you're not going to be able to tell the whole story. Do you have a proper understanding of who the characters are that you can make that come out in the scenes that you keep? I think a good example of this is The Martian, where the book is super technical and there's lots and lots of science. But one thing they understood in the movie about the character was the humor and the wit and the persona of that character. And it allows it to come and shine way through, especially when they don't go nearly into as much of the science as they do in the book. So being able to take the heart and soul of the character and be able to display that on screen, I think is a huge success when it's able to be done right.
Yeah.
I think another one for me is that the movie understands what was critical and what isn't, in terms of what to keep and what to drop. What are the strong points of the book and what might be weak points of the book? I was just thinking about this, the Harry Potter series. They leave out the character of Peeves. And in the books, Peeves shows up regularly and is just kind of annoying. And he just kind of does little things and is annoying.
He's my pet peeves.
He doesn't. And what they basically decided with the movies is he's not essential. Like he doesn't play any role. He's not essential. This is something we can cut without having to lose anything that's going to relate to the story, the character, or the overall feel. Now, had they left all the ghosts out, that would have made a difference. But they selectively chose that this is one that we're going to leave out.
I mean, plus they kept emo Ron throughout all the movies. So
Yeah.
watching the movies again, I was like, Ron would fit really well in like a late 90s, early 2000s post-hardcore band. Like with the scene where they're in the tent and he leaves all upset about the amulet thing, I was like, Ron is just about to write the most fire breakup album of all time.
Indeed. So, okay, if that's when they go right, what happens when it goes bad? What happens when it goes bad?
I think like the opposite of what I said for it to be good. The casting is off. They have changed the original plot, or have made changes that don't fit, or don't keep with the theme of the book. Then it's not good.
Yeah.
Like you said, Ryan, is they cut the things that were essential and leave the things that weren't. That can definitely be a difficulty. And that is a skill, because no matter how much you want to faithfully adapt a book to a movie, you're not going to be able to transfer 300 to 500 pages of material into an hour and a half.
No.
It's just not going to happen. So there has to be decisions made. And sometimes they're not the best ones.
Yeah. I think, both of you guys have mentioned it, but like changing the entire substance of the book is a no. That's a no. Changing too much. And I think of like Ready Player One as a good example. Taken on itself, it's not a terrible movie. Taken for anyone who actually read the book, it's not the same story at all. It's not at all. And even though even though what was I going to say? Even though the author was involved in the screenplay, you change so much, and you change the entire nature of it. It doesn't work. And I think another one is when the director or the adapter doesn't understand why people love the book. I think that's one thing that really makes it go bad, because the director may have an understanding of what he likes about it, or maybe he was just given the project and he just works on adapting it. But I think it's essential to understand why people love the book, because you don't adapt books that nobody read and that nobody likes. So obviously this book already has a big enough fan base. Why did the fans like it? If you understand that, you can get it. But when a director doesn't, it becomes plainly obvious that they don't get it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. All right. So now that we've talked about our book adaptations, let's talk about some of our favorite ones. Now, there's a huge list to choose from, so this is pretty expansive. So let's just kind of let's go around in a circle. Let's all give one, and then we'll swing back around a couple times. So Rob, why don't you start?
I mean, mine's, I guess, cheating, because it's not technically a full book, but I can't not mention my favorite movie of all time, because I didn't mention it in any discussion we have, because it's my favorite movie of all time and it's the best movie ever made. Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption.
I knew you were going there.
The basis of The Shawshank Redemption, in case you didn't know. But that was a short story by Stephen King, not an actual full novel. And what impresses me so much about that is how they were able to extrapolate the entire story they did out of that short story, because it's not an easy thing to do. And he appreciated what they did with it. And sometimes authors really don't like what people do with their books or short stories. And I love the tension interplay between the characters in the movie, and it's just a broadening of the horizons of the short story. And I think it's really just phenomenal. And I could talk about the Shawshank Redemption for every podcast ever until the end of time. But this is not the Shawshank Redemption podcast. So somebody else talk about a different book.
All right, go ahead, Lauren.
Well, my all-time favorite book is Life of Pi, which I have here for everyone watching.
Oh, visual aids, love it.
Yes, so Life of Pi is my favorite book. So when I heard it was going to become a movie, I was a little worried about it, just how it's going to go, but I thought it was really well done. The cinematography was amazing. I think it won an Oscar for, or it won awards for its cinematography. And I know the director won some awards. I just thought it stuck to the plot. It really nailed some of the key dialogue that I really loved. I think one of the things I loved about the book was that the main character, Pi, he was such a deep thinker and he had all these thoughts in his mind, and they were able to still get those across, even though, like you said, that could be challenging to take what a character's thinking and everything and having it show on screen. So anyway, I thought that was super well done.
Excellent. I am going to, one that I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to re-highlight, is The Martian. And one of the things I loved about The Martian, on top of them being able to really, really translate his character well, is whenever you're reading a book, and this particularly applies to space, but it applies to all books, you want to have an idea of what would it actually be like to be there, to see that. And so to be able to see Mars, and to look at it and the vast landscapes of another planet, just took a book and really, really gave it the visual element that you can't get when you're reading. And so that adaptation was excellent. And I think they made excellent choices as to what they kept and what they didn't keep. Including, they did a slight tweak on the ending to that one. And I love what they did with the ending on that one. Now, that was not the one I originally was going to say, but in the book version, he kind of becomes like a recluse who's completely socially awkward and isn't sure if he wants to do anything ever again and just sits around his house. In the movie, he becomes a teacher. And I think it's a more satisfying ending, even though that is not the exact ending in the book.
Matt Damon was good in that role too.
He really was. He really was.
Good.
All right, round two. What you got, Rob?
We mentioned it earlier, but the Harry Potter series for me is impressive just because of the breadth of work that was put into it. Using the same core of actors throughout all the movies was definitely helpful in that. And I think the thing that makes it a good adaptation is that it keeps the spirit of the books. Now, there are obviously a lot of things that you can't include in the movies because there's so much source material, but the spirit of just a fantastical world is really displayed on the screen and translated really well. I also enjoy in the movies how you feel the stakes and the emotional and physical weight of what's going on grow with each movie. Just like in the books, the kids are growing up, in the movies, you see that even more. And I think it's very interesting tonally how they shift over the course of the 7+1 movies. If you want to call it 8, 7 is 2 parts. But just the stakes just keep getting raised every single one. And there's real weight to it and real gravity to it. And I think that it did a tremendous service to J.K. Rowling's work and displaying what she was trying to have come across as far as tone and just this other crazy world that these kids are involved in that's still set within a real world. And I just think it was done superbly.
Yeah.
They were really well done.
Absolutely. Lauren, what you got?
Well, the one that we kind of alluded to earlier, Gone Girl, from that was 2014. That was made into a movie. Ben Affleck and Rosamund Pike as the main characters. I think they were really great choices. That was the first time I really paid attention to Rosamund Pike. I don't know if I'd seen her in something before, but I really liked her. I thought she played Amy really well. And that was when I read the book, I didn't like the ending at all. I could not believe that they would end up together or they would stay together. But I just like movies to follow the book. So I wanted it to end that way as well. So I was glad that it did.
Yeah, I really, really like that movie. And I agree. I think the changes they've made actually enhanced and worked better visually than they did in the book. And so they made great choices with that one. And Rosamund Pike is a fantastic actress. I do like her in almost everything I've seen of her. And I thought the feel of the movie, it really captured the feel and the emotion of it. So, really well done. My next one is going to be, since you said that, I will say Inferno. And because this is the one that I was going to say, they changed the ending in Inferno. This is based on the Dan Brown novel. Now, the premise of Inferno, we've talked about it once or twice on the podcast, is basically the bad guy has a Malthusian mindset, which is basically the world is just going to keep on populating over and over and over and over again until there's so few resources, and then we're all just going to die. And that's based on a theory from a guy named Malthus. And in the book, they basically like, well, yeah, we know this is true. And the virus gets out and everyone gets infected. And they're so like, okay, I guess that was the right thing to do. We're all going to die anyway. So, okay, no biggie. And first of all, Malthusian theory has been completely debunked. That's not going to happen. And the book just takes it as an absolute certainty. Secondly, like, what was the point of the book? if that was your attitude, what was the point of the book? So the movie actually changes it to a more movie ending where they actually go through and they stop the virus from being released. I thought it changed what was a major flaw in the book. So, but it did not stick with the original ending. So, yeah, I'm not as hardcore about it as you are.
One I'd like to mention that like massively changes how the book is written, but I think for the better is The Princess Bride. Goldman, because there is an entire story within a story within the story that's not in the movie.
Yeah,
and I think that it would be very difficult to portray in a movie. So I think them taking it and simplifying it to this is just the grandfather telling the story to his grandson and then showing the story, I think served the movie really well, because it's easy for people to grab onto. It's easy for people to quote lines from the fantasy story that's in the movie. And I think if you had muddied the waters by including all the other stuff that's in the book, it would have lost people, because it's not convoluted, but it's just a different kind of experience reading the book. If you've never read the book, you should, because there's like a whole other plot line happening in the book that you don't see in the movie at all. But I think they made the right choice when they did that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Have you read the book, Lauren?
I have not.
I did a long time ago. And if I remember correctly, there's a tonal difference too.
Yeah.
The book is a lot scarier, if I remember correctly.
And there's a whole story in the book about the author like talking about the book. And then it's talking about someone reading the book to someone, and then it's talking about the actual fantasy stories. There's like this whole extra level that isn't shown in the movie at all.
Have you seen the movie The Words? Either of you guys seen the movie The Words?
Yes, I have.
That's one that did the same thing. There's like an upper level story and then a secondary story, and then they're reading a story. It's one level too much. I think that's true. Like when you start getting to third level stories, unless this is Inception and it's being directed by Christopher Nolan, most directors cannot pull that off.
I don't think I knew The Words was a book.
I don't know if it is or not. That popped into my head because it is a 3-level story where you're telling the story within a story within a story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So was that yours or
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lauren. Well, this will be the last round, by the way, so choose wisely.
Okay, so my next one, I love young adult fiction, and I love John Green. So Fault in Our Stars is another one of my favorites. And another one that I was like, oh, is this gonna be done well? But it was. I thought Shailene Woodley was a really good casting for Hazel, and I thought Ansel Elgort was really good for Augustus. I love the soundtrack. They stuck with the plot. There's a lot of like really great lines in the book that were in the movie as well. So yeah, it's just really well done.
Excellent.
John Green is my homie.
Oh, great.
If you have not listened to his podcast, The Anthropocene Reviewed, you should do that immediately.
I'm actually reading the book right now.
Yeah, he basically he goes through 2 or 3 things every episode and rates them on a scale from 1 about how effective they are in relation to the world, which is awesome. And if you don't know, John Green is also like a believer, but he is also someone who constantly is looking at and he's examining his faith, which is a cool thing to me because it's not an easy thing to do. And I actually, this might be like the coolest thing that's ever happened to me in my life, but he actually replied to one of my Reddit comments once.
Oh,
And so like John Green's my favorite.
yeah.
And this is not a movie, but I would also recommend reading his book Turtles All the Way Down. I'd recommend reading all of his books, but that book in particular is one I really, really like.
Yeah, all of his are great.
I've seen several movies based on John Green books. I have never actually read a John Green book.
Yeah, he's a fantastic author.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, one of my favorites.
I would say the hallmark of his writing, which I think translates pretty well into his movies, is that he has an ability to write people's voices the way they would actually talk, which is not the easiest thing to do, especially when you're dealing with like a young adult characters. But when you write it, it just feels authentic. Like it just feels like, yes, this person would actually talk like this. I believe this.
Yeah. Nice. So my last one is one that we've talked about a number of times, and that's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. And I'm specifically referring here to the American version of the film. The American version of the film sticks so much closer to the actual book than does the Swedish version, which is kind of ironic considering Stieg Larsson is Swedish. So you would think if anyone was going to stick closer, it'd be the Swedish version, but no, it isn't actually. I'm currently watching the Swedish version again, and they change a lot of stuff unnecessarily. In particular, the Swedish version changes who figures out the code, the biblical code. It changes how the characters meet. I mean, how the characters meet is one of the key things in the story, and they change how the characters come to meet each other. And there was really no particular reason for it. So the American version actually does a really, really good job of conveying the story almost exactly as it unfolds. And on top of which, I think the character interactions in that movie, especially between Rooney Mara and Daniel Craig, I think that really, really captures the essence of the characters and how the two of them interacted in the books, and kind of that sort of chemistry but not chemistry thing that they had going on the whole time. But I think it didn't shy away from being brutal where the book was brutal, which is hard to do. And the Swedish version definitely didn't take it as far, which you could say from a I having to watch that standpoint. I mean, there's some value in saying, okay, we'll cut that back a little bit. But from an artistic standpoint of saying, okay, we're going to show it how it is, how the book conveyed it. It did a great job of conveying that. So you can decide which is your preference in terms of a watcher. But I think it really did a great job sticking to what the actual written material was.
I would say honorable mention to what you just referenced. Another one I think of when you say that it's hard to portray brutality on screen would be Fight Club. because that book is absolutely, oh,
Yeah.
it's a lot.
That book is a
And
lot.
they were able to, like you said, they're able to kind of cut some of the things out of it to make it palatable enough for a movie, but still have the movie be pretty brutal. But I think a lot of people, because they did that, missed what the book was actually saying, which is like, the people in this book are not living in the life that the way you want to live it.
Yes.
Yeah. This is not an ideal to live up to. This is bad, which the book does a better job of having come across, I think.
Yeah.
But maybe it's just because, Brad Pitt's a hottie. I don't know.
All right, so we'll close out by giving Lauren the last word, and I believe you have one that is going to be a film adaptation that you are looking forward to.
So I'm looking forward to, it's called Nothing to See Here. I'm not sure when they're making it a movie, but it was done by the same people that did Fault in Our Stars. So it was just this really quirky story, really different. And I'm really excited to see what they do with it to bring it on the screen.
Awesome.
That is an interesting point that, like, I really like to read, just to read too. And
Yeah.
when you're reading and you're like, oh, I really hope they make a movie out of this book.
Yeah.
I just read a book called Anxious People by Frederick Bachman, and
He's one of my
finishing
favorites.
it, I was like, I want to see this as a movie real bad.
Yeah, that would be a really great one to make into a movie.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought when I read Ready Player One, and then the movie came. So
that's what about 1 billion people have been thinking about, a little book called Dune. That's going to be a movie pretty soon.
It's coming. I have much more faith in Dennis Villanueva, though. We'll see.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Lauren. We appreciate your talk.
Yeah.
Hopefully we have a chance to have further discussions in the future.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. We'll catch you next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Now, let's go to our watch list. These are movies that we have watched over the past week, where we give you a quick recap and our thoughts on it. Rob, why don't you go first? What did you watch this week?
So started a new job this week, and as such, I'm not going to the theater, which I was bummed about, because there's, like Ryan said, there are several movies in the theater that I want to watch. So I'm going to have to make time for that this next week. But on vacation, we watched A Quiet Place, the first one, and I really enjoyed that. We watched it one of the nights we were away on vacation. My sister and her husband and my wife and I watched it together, and I just love how that movie holds tension throughout, because we expect when nothing is happening and there's quiet for something bad to happen. That movie just holds that throughout. And the intro is great, how it's just quiet, and then all of a sudden there's noise, and then all hell breaks loose. I just think John Krasinski did a fantastic job with that movie, as well as the second, but we only watched the first one this last weekend. And I have not watched this week, but I'm watching tomorrow, so it's kind of cheating. I'm going to Movies in the Park thing and watching Smallfoot tomorrow. Speaking of some other famous people who are in that, LeBron James is in that movie. But that movie is a really well done animated feature about what would happen if basically Yetis among Wilsonman came across humans who they think are not real and are fiction, like we think Yetis are. And it's called Smallfoot because that's what they call humans, because they're not Bigfoot, they're Smallfoot. And it's funny, it has good music throughout it, some really interesting different takes on music, and there's a parody of Under Pressure, which I absolutely love in the movie. So if maybe you can just search that up on YouTube, find it by itself, Under Pressure parody for Smallfoot. If you don't want to watch the whole movie, watch that because it's really funny. So I recommend that. We're going to be seeing that with friends and going to enjoy some food from food trucks while we watch the movie. So that'll be good.
Very nice. Excellent. For me this week, I watched movies, and I will say the theme for these movies was at least some level of disappointment. So I'll start with the most disappointing one I watched. 2004 movie Twisted. This stars Garcia. I am Andy Garcia. And why do I do this where I just like blank out on actresses' name? Ashley Judd. And it's not a good movie. It just is not a good movie. I'd wondered why. It's a type of movie that I like, and I wonder, why had I not seen this movie before? And there was a reason why I hadn't seen this movie before. The characters are extremely stereotypical, especially Ashley Judd's character, who's like the only female in the movie, and she's just a sex-crazed lunatic. And it's just so it's so stereotypical. It's ridiculous. Her relationship with Andy Garcia in the movie is bizarre and oddly creepy, and it doesn't make any sense. And the plot is just mangled. And so it's not good. So if we're coming up with the anti-watch list, Twisted is anti-watch list. So it's just not that good. It's not a good movie. If you want to see it to judge for yourself, have at it. It's on, I want to say it's on Hulu, but yeah, not great. The next one is Mission Impossible Fallout. Now, while overall I really like Mission Impossible Fallout, it's the newest one from the Mission Impossible series. The one thing I would say still gets me every single time, I don't like the helicopter scene at the end. I really don't like the helicopter scene. I think it just pushes the bounds of being too unrealistic. Normally, Chris McQuarrie, I think, is a fantastic director and does an awesome job of integrating things. And the one thing that Mission Impossible, I thought, has done is it's been significantly more grounded than, say, some of the Bond movies are. And while it's a little bit implausible, and while they push the bounds on technology, they are significantly more grounded in reality. But I thought the helicopter scene where he goes and chases down a helicopter, gets in a helicopter, it's not the right helicopter, then he has to basically attempt to wreck the other helicopter, and then all the falling and helicopter crashes and everything like that. It just pushed me over the edge a little bit, that I just feel like it went too far with its adaptation. You've seen it, right?
Yeah.
What did you think about that scene?
Yeah, I would say that I felt somewhat the same way. I know that he did like a lot of practical work on the stunt, which is impressive, but it doesn't necessarily mean that like it was realistic looking in the final product.
Yeah, it felt much more like something you'd see in a Fast and Furious movie or one of the 90s Bond movies than I thought was appropriate for that, for these particular movies. So also, and then the last one I saw was Jungle Cruise. I got a chance to see that this week. Overall, I like the film, and since I know you haven't seen it, I will refrain from giving major spoilers. One thing I will say is there were some moments, we've compared it to the Pirates of the Caribbean series. There are some fantasy elements, in particular in Dead Man's Chest from the Pirates series, that I was not a particular fan of. Some of the more fantastical elements of there, both visually and storytelling wise. Jungle Cruise carried over a few of those type of things to the movie that I didn't particularly care for. But there were some cool scenes. The interaction between Emily Blunt and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, I thought was good. And I thought those characters were well developed. There were just a few things in that movie that just tweaked me a little bit that I did. I had high expectations for it because I thought it was going to be a really grand adventure. And while it was still a good movie, a good solid movie, and definitely worth seeing, it didn't quite live up to my expectations. Okay, you got anything else on that before we wrap up?
I do not.
All right, well, we'll wrap up today with our recommendations. And so we will recommend yet another movie to book adaptation, however, one that we have not mentioned so far. All right, so Rob, what do you got?
I'm gonna recommend two that are very different from one, like
Okay.
as different as they could possibly be from one another. The first is based on a book written about the Civil War, and it is The Red Badge of Courage, and I'm recommending the black and white 1951 version of the movie. There is an in-color 1974 version of the movie also, but I would recommend the black and white one, and this is purely a recommendation based on storytelling, because a black and white movie for 1951 is not going to have a whole lot of like special effects and set pieces and major things to catch your eye. Yeah. On the exact opposite end of the spectrum, I'm going to recommend a movie based on the graphic novel Watchmen, because for a long time people said that it would be impossible to make a movie out of this graphic novel, and people waited and waited and waited and said it can never be done. And it is not perfect, and there are slight differences with the graphic novel and the final version, but I think visually it's stunning, and I think that they did a really good job with casting and to the tone of the book, and just the hopelessness and despair of society when there are no rules. Basically, who watches the Watchmen is the catchphrase from the book and the movie, and I would recommend it. Jeffrey Dean Morgan, that's his name, right? Plays the character of the comedian in the movie, and I think he is fantastic and really brings the character from the book to life. So I'd recommend watching The Watchmen.
Okay. And I will recommend two as well. I will do Girl on a Train. The book was by Paula Hawkins. The movie stars Emily Blunt. And I always like Emily Blunt, and I thought it was an interesting and compelling story. And I think they did a reasonable job of emulating that in movie fashion. I will also recommend the 1990 Mel Gibson version of Hamlet, obviously based on the Shakespeare tragedy. I thought this adaptation isn't one of those where they were doing this thing where they were like partially modern, partially old school that was really popular in the mid to late 90s. This one is an attempt to stick straight into the period piece, hold straight to the actual book with the actual language, and I thought they did a very good job of it. It's quite compelling. I know not everyone's into Shakespeare, but check out 1990s Hamlet.
And I'm very partial to the Kenneth Branagh version of Hamlet, so watch that one too.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is all the time we have for you on Film for Fans. Take a moment, rate, subscribe, and share with your friends. We'd love to have you. Until next time, enjoy the movies.